Hello, and welcome to Design Driven, the latest collaboration from Homepage News, Springboard Futures, and the Inspired Home Show. I'm Tom Mirabile, principal and founder of Springboard and consumer trend forecaster for the International Housewares Association. The mission of the Design Driven series is to bring updates and inspiration on the evolving role of design in the home and housewares marketplace. We're going to be inviting industry-leading and industry-changing design and style experts to the table to talk about what's new, prepare for what's next, and everything in between, from color and materials to form and function. So we thought, what better way to launch a new series on design than to do it with Leatrice Eiseman, Executive Director of the Pantone Color Institute. It would be an understatement to say that Lee is the most influential color analyst and forecaster in the world. She's also a voracious culture vulture who gathers inspiration and information wherever she goes. And she's a joy to talk to. So let's join Lee for our premiere episode. And again, welcome to Design Driven.
Lee, thank you so much for joining us. It's really
my pleasure. My pleasure.
You're always, I think you've been the juggernaut in 3 series of mine now, and it's always such a pleasure to have you and such great information. So I'm just going to jump straight to the questions because we're trying to keep these relatively fast. The first question is, Lee, in recent presentations, you've mentioned re-envisioning the past, and it's such an important concept that I'd really like to give it a little bit more air here. I mean, in recent years, we've seen the reemergence of palettes from the 60s, the 70s, and form direction from the 60s, 70s, 80s. But would you share your thoughts and perhaps an example of how does re-envisioning differ from just revisiting?
Well, re-envisioning is an interesting word because it implies that you are looking at the past, but you're looking through newer eyes, so to speak. And that's what re-envisioning is all about. We take what happened in the past as inspirational, and we certainly use that as a basis of a palette. I mean, obviously, if you were doing anything that's about the late 60s and 70s, you'd have to take avocado, harvest green, gold into consideration. But you may want to skew those colors slightly so that in your knowledge, if perhaps you've had some problem with a color like avocado before, you're going to twist it a little bit and tweak it a little bit so that it's still in that yellow-green family. But it might not be quite the muddy avocado that we saw in that particular period. So there are ways to take old colors, so to speak. And when I say old, colors don't really get old, but old within that context of time. And you use that as an influence that people might recognize as being significant of a period, but you're going to slightly skew the color. Now, you may opt not to do that, but if you feel that with your particular consumer base, that they would accept that color base better, then that's where you go. Now, I would have to say, however, that if you're dealing with a younger demographic, and you go back to the colors as they were originally used, and those young eyes never saw them in the late 60s and 70s, and they may look at it and say, even the old avocado carbon, and say, hey, that's a cool color. They might like the muddiness of it. So again, you've got to think of your demographic. If it's an older audience, I would say be a little cautious if you know that a color didn't have a good reputation. But if it's a younger audience, I think you can still go in that same direction.
Yeah, it's interesting how often now you see things that have a reference that you're familiar with, and then you say, "Oh, this looks just like," and the younger generations are just like, "This is completely fresh." But,
exactly, fresh is a good word.
Yes, and I love the way you sort of stopped demonizing harvest gold and avocado, because it's such a charged, there's such a stigma attached to those two colors. Let me ask you, do you think that when palettes are re-energized or refreshed, are you seeing additions of new colors to those re-envisioned statements palettes?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's always room for something else that is more currently trend driven, as opposed to just pulling it out of the past, but adding another color to it that might make anyone stop and look at it. And it's slightly familiar, but there's something just a little different about it. And isn't that the name of the game? To
It
try
is.
to
I mean, yeah.
consumer? Yeah.
I know the things I respond to are, I'm never going to respond to something I've already lived through. I want something fresh. I like the familiarity. There's comfort in that. So you
Yes.
kind of want the familiarity, but you want something different about it, something refreshed.
Yes, yes. And not only that, when you think of it in terms of, let's say, retail display or on a website, if you're going to do the same color palette, it may be familiar and part of a person's comfort zone, and that's fine. But if it's all in the neutral tones, and the eye will have a tendency to just gloss over it. Oh, okay, same old
Yeah.
neutrals. But throw that dollop of pink in there and oh, why is that different? How is that different? That catches their eye, and that's the name of the game.
That's really interesting that you say that, because it's neutrals have become it's really funny. There isn't a neutral statement that means anything right now that doesn't have that accent. And it used to be neutrals were neutrals, and you could have every variant of cream or black or whatever it was, but there was no hue that had a particular leaning one way or the other, warm or cool. Some people say neutrals aren't even warm or cool. So that's such a great point, because now between texture and an accent color of some sort, neutrals have taken on a whole new life. It's just wonderful. Speaking of things like that, so let me ask you one other question about sort of re-envisioning design, because this is holistic, and you have such, you travel the world looking at design everywhere. You're a culture vulture if there ever was one. And I guess what I want to know is, do you feel like it affects form as well? Does form take the same path? Do you have to update form on things? Do you see updates to that from an original inspiration?
I think that form is, yes, a part of that. I think that that's all part of the newness. And it's bound to happen with technology. We see that changes have been wrought as far as form is concerned, especially. But it's still color. I know that's going to be one of your questions. What is the leading indicator of what people will look at first? And in our studies, we show that invariably it is color first. It is so attached to us emotionally, even from childhood, that the color attracts our eye and brings our attention to whatever it is. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to be a bold, bright color all the time. Again, you've got to think in terms of context, how and where you're using it. Maybe it's the finish on the color. There's so many aspects to it now. Nevertheless, it is the color first that the consumer will pay attention to.
Yeah, I was speaking with Michelle Lamb a couple of days ago, and she had brought a figure to my attention about exactly that, and I'll find it later. But the upshot was that consumers either engage or don't with a product because of its color within something under about 30 or 45 seconds. And, that's an amazing, if you don't grab them with color, they don't even get to see the features and benefits. It is we have a very visceral, sort of reaction to it.
Exactly. And that word visceral is a very important word, because it comes from deep within. It's an emotional attachment. It's not just, it's a trend color. It's more than that.
Which is why I love the way you said you've spoken about color in the past, and it's like you won't say any one color's right for everything, and you've done amazing books. One of which was, what was the name of your book that I love? The one on it was, I think, your second book, and you were talking about like colors, meanings, and
Messages and meanings.
Messages and
Color,
meanings.
Messages and meanings. Yes.
And it was wonderful. I love that book. It's I actually keep it on my nightstand, but it's like, it's one of those things that it's, and those messages and meanings can be different for different people, different generations. So those are important choices.
Yes, absolutely.
So I also wanted to talk a little bit about value. So Springboard, we do an annual value equation index where we look year to year and say what creates value for consumers. And in 2023, we observed the continuation of a shift in the way consumers define value and quality. So across age groups, across income levels, durability and reliability are the top two considerations when people decide whether or not to purchase, especially a home product. So we know the considerations like economic uncertainty and environmental impacts are affecting the way we purchase things. But do those considerations also affect our response or our views on color? For example, do we look at a color of a more durable product for like a sofa, a cookware, small electrics in a different way because we expect to own that item for a longer time? Do we invest in them differently?
Well, again, that depends on the customer. But I would say that there is a tendency when there are economic concerns that people will turn back to neutral colors. However, what are we calling the neutral colors today?
I'm going to ask you about that later. I have the questions in the wings.
Absolutely. What is a neutral now? I pose to my students all the time that you need to think about green as a neutral color, just the way it's used within nature, right?
Yeah.
Do we ever walk outside and look at the tulips, the red tulips, you know, the yellow tulips, whatever color, and say, boy, did Mother Nature boo-boo with that one. It's terrible
Right.
against the green background, right?
Yeah, no.
No, it just doesn't happen. Our eye becomes so accustomed to seeing it. It's so pervasive in nature.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that, but yeah, green is a ground. I mean, it's the background to everything that we experience in the world. You know, I mean, it really is. That's true.
Exactly.
It's a part of every day.
Right. So green in my parlance is a neutral color. And I've always preached that to my students and my clients. But again, what shade of green? We might want to look at what the upcoming trends are and say, all right, we're going to do a green, but maybe we need to tweak it a little bit more to the blue side because it's an upcoming trend. So again, you've got some room to move around, to wiggle around in that space. But neutrals today also, I call them nuanced neutrals. Sometimes you look at a color and you say, I'm not sure, is that a blue or is it a gray? You know, what is it? What's happening there? And you study it for a while, and it could be right on the cusp between a blue and a gray. And you put it up on the wall or in an appliance or wherever you might use it, and you put it in the kitchen and you say, wow, it works with everything. Right. I'm not sure if it's a blue or it's a gray. So again, we have those nuances of our neutrals that I think a lot has been brought about by technology, the ability to broaden our scope of color, and also the finishes on the product that may make it skew to one direction or another. But the point is, if it starts out as a neutral gray or a neutral beige or a neutral taupe, whatever it might be, there are always other influences as far as our eye is concerned, as far as lighting is concerned, that might just tweak it to the side a little bit, and yet still, essentially, it's a neutral. So a long-winded answer to your question, there may be a return to those neutrals for many consumers because of the dependability factor, longevity factor. Still, there's something a little bit new about it or just a little different. It qualifies as a neutral. Whether it's a blue or gray, it's still essentially going to be regarded as a neutral.
Okay. You know, that raises another question. At the, I was just reviewing the best of the best for the Red Dot Design Awards. And one of the things that I noticed, and this may not be a trend, but it struck me, and also Michelle Lamb mentioned it, it was kind of strange, was that when we see at the higher echelons of design, that sort of rarefied view at the top, it seems like people are using less blue. It seems like they'll do, you mentioned clay, and you mentioned those clay colors in terracotta. We're seeing more saturated variants of that. But I'm surprised to see that, that the assortment, they'll have, maybe a variety of paler values of, say, a chair. But the punctuating color is maybe a very vivid, not vivid, actually, a very saturated clay, almost dark terracotta, like wet terracotta, something like that. But I was surprised because you've always been a real proponent of blue, and so have I. And I'm wondering, is that ebbing for a while, or is it still as popular as it was on a mass level?
I would have to say that blue, in my eye, in my mind, in my projections, is still as popular as ever. Okay. What we are seeing, though, is the integration of colors like the terracotta, the warmer earth shades now being punctuated with a blue, where the terracotta is the major influence. But just to get some good contrast, a complementary color to it, it's great to use a blue. So to say that blue is disappearing or ebbing, maybe there are some who would buy the color, not the ultimate consumer, but the manufacturer might say, well, we've done a lot of blue, so maybe we need to do something else. And will
Well, also, this is,
affect
you
the
know, the
marketplace
top
as well.
1% of the market, you know, so like
Yeah.
we're, you know, but I think
Our stats tell us that it's still a major influence, and we're using it in our future forecasts as well.
great. And what about you had mentioned something that I wanted to bring up again. Darker, more saturated colors and darker sort of earth influenced colors. Were you mentioned it during your presentation. I thought that was fascinating because while I absolutely agree, it seems so counterintuitive when we think of how you know, we've been trying to keep things light. You know, we've been very coming out of the pandemic, we're very bright and all of that. And now, is it because we're ready for that again, or what do you think it is inspiring that direction?
Well, you know, I'm a big proponent of the entertainment industry as a huge influence. And certainly we have seen that in the darker films that are being featured, the costuming, the backgrounds, so much of it that has that, you know, really pervasive, dramatic darkness. And I think when people get used to seeing it, you know, when they're streaming or watching TV or whatever, that enters their consciousness. Oh, I like the way this particular red looks against that dark instead of using it against a light tone. I think that's had a huge influence. There's no question in my mind that it has. Now, doesn't mean that everybody's going to be doing that. You know, again, we have to look at it from the context of the demographics, but I think your younger consumers in particular, who are the primary consumers of the entertainment industry,
Right,
are going to love it. They're going to think it's very goth-like. And
I was just gonna say, please don't tell me God is coming back.
yeah,
But
no
it's right on
question.
the tip of your tongue.
Absolutely. Mhm.
And speaking about the digital world, I'm curious because I think that you mentioned the importance of color in the digital world, whether it's gaming or whether we're streaming video or whether, you know, and I think also the way we consume video now has a greater impact because so many people tend to binge a whole series like in a weekend, and so the impact of what we see is to my mind more lasting. But do you feel that? I just want to confirm this. Do you feel that those influences that we experience digitally, that they do translate to the physical world? You know, I mean, that they create desire.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any question involved because there's so much interest in it now. And even if people don't really understand what that means, what is all this talk about, you know, digital? I'm not sure I understand that. Still, it draws attention. People
Right.
start to read about it, then they look for examples of it. So when there's high interest level going on, you're bound to get that as an influence, even though people don't completely understand it. As I mentioned, if you talk about it, if you create a buzz, then people start looking at it, and then it does enter into the stream of consciousness.
You had mentioned recently, you'd mentioned Bridgerton as having an influence, and then the prequel, Queen Charlotte, which we're actually watching that episode in pieces because I can't let the whole thing go. Like, so we just watch 20 minutes and then do something else because I hate them on the last episode. But do you feel like that Regency palette, albeit somewhat pulled back from the first, is still going to have an influence?
Absolutely. You know, that's such a wildly popular show.
Yeah.
I did watch it as well. And I thought, again, it was amazingly done as far as the costuming and the settings were concerned. They weren't as vivid as the first show. And I think in the first show, it was in the second, it was such a change, you know, to see Regency in such brilliant colors. We generally don't think of them as being brilliant. We have a different concept. We think it's old and faded, but it wasn't.
No. It's
No.
really strange. Yeah, you said that too. And I think that's amazing because it's
Yeah.
like taking old paintings and peeling back all the varnish and finding out that they're really quite vivid.
Exactly. So I think that, yes, sequels in my mind, when I see that a sequel's coming up, I glom right onto it and take a look at it.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, the second film that really is for children, that's it's all about color and emotion. And I talked about that in
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And I will have to say that even though it's a child's film, and people often wonder when I'm talking about kids' films, well, I'm an adult. Why would I go see a kid's
Mhm.
film? But again, it enters into the stream of consciousness, and it's all about emotion. And Amy Poehler is the one who is the voiceover, and it's going to get, it's already getting a huge amount of publicity. So I think that children's films, and let's face it, a lot of younger parents especially sit down with their kids and grandparents and watch the movie over and over and over again. That has got to be transmitted into your brain.
Absolutely. I know I
And
did.
so when you're out in the marketplace, you're looking at
well,
the
and beyond that,
website.
I mean, I think the Gen Z, I was looking at statistics the other day on the grocery channel, and 93% of Gen Z parents say that their children influence what they buy in a grocery store.
Oh,
I mean, that's a huge percentage, so it's got to be the same, across the board. They don't just influence you in that one way, so it's, it drips in. We just we don't do anything to stop them from screaming, right? So
I know. Well, the last one really was quite amazing, I thought.
yeah, it really was. I liked it a lot. There was a thing going around with my friends at the time, which one are you? And
I love that.
yeah, not so much, but I wasn't flattering. Let's just put it that way. But I thought, it's like you said, I was like, okay, we're 7 adults sitting around a table with cocktails talking about which one of them we are, which we identify. What happened to Sex in the City, where we were like, which are you? So it's like
That's right.
that sort of
That's
thing.
right.
But,
Yeah.
it is a tremendous influence.
Yeah.
Is there any other gaming or other, I loved, and for those of you who haven't seen the Magentaverse created by Pantone for the for the introduction of the new color, try to find, I'm sure Pantone has it somewhere online, but it's a brilliant, very short video that is just so dynamic and gorgeous. Is there any other digital influence that you think is important right now, Lee? Whether it's television, you've gotten some film, we've gotten some television. Is there anything else in gaming, in anything that is digital that you think is important?
Well, gaming, of course, is always important to us, again, a certain demographic. But I would have to say, when you look at it from a consumer level, the thing that people are most captivated by still, it's been around for a few years, it's not going away, and droves of people are going to it, is immersive art. When you look at that influence, it is so huge. I've been to several of them. And now that I'm living here in Tucson, I went to Phoenix to go see the immersive art there. And I look around, I study the people who come, and they are just absolutely so entranced that they are involved in the color. They feel a part of the painting. And I think that overwhelming experience that just envelopes you is going to continue to have a huge influence. No matter where you go, whether it's to Vegas or any place else, I think that immersive tendency now is going to continue on, but in different levels, not necessarily just in the art world, but it's going to spread to other areas as well.
I think it's so incredibly important. And, it's funny when I speak to friends across the country, it's only the people who live in major cities who seem to know about it. But it is next time you go to a major city, make some time, I'm telling it to the people who are watching, and just, go onto Yelp or Google and say, find immersive experiences. In New York, there's so many of them, where
Right.
you just go up into a skyscraper and the whole room just becomes around you.
Exactly.
And some of them are based on, Van Gogh or, other artists, but sometimes it's just experiences, and they are incredible. They're incredible. It's it really makes you completely rethink what's possible.
Yeah.
I think the only other question that I really wanted to ask you was actually a fill in the blank question. So fill in the blank. Blank is the new black. Doesn't have to be a color. I don't want it to be a color.
I love that question, because what my answer is, black is the new black. It never goes away.
Okay.
It's always there. We have to be aware when you are selling your goods to your customer that to say black is being replaced, to me, is just silly.
Right.
Because there are certain areas where black is still the ultimate in stealth. Still, the heaviness, the weight, the power that no other color has. You can deepen and deepen and deepen, but it never quite gets to where black is.
Right.
So for me, black is the new black. And it's not a question of, oh, the trend this year is navy is the new black. Again, to me, that's kind of silly. Let's not
Yeah.
throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's keep our black. We can do other things, but we have to recognize the psychology of black and its strength.
Well, it's funny. I think you had talked about taking other colors and really shading them, and so you can take them as dark as you want, but they're never black. But one of the interesting things that is, it was apparent in the Pantone booth, and also I'm really seeing it even in when you look at Queen Charlotte, the ways that she wears tonalities. It's not just gray hair; it's 75 shades of gray. I mean, there's so much. I think that we've really embraced, tints and shades of any color, so that you're not stuck in a there is no exactly right color. And that flexibility really allows consumers to be more, it allows buyers to make choices that complement and that work together, and it allows consumers to really kind of make choices that they don't feel like, oh, it's not just that right green, it has to, and I think that's
Exactly.
great.
That's a very well taken point, Tom. And you use the word tonality.
Mhm.
I teach a master class in color, and this is something I drill into my students all the time. Let's look for the tonalities. And when you get back to neutrals in particular, the tonalities of the neutrals are so important, and the
so important.
undertone of the neutral. What else is happening within that color? How do we play on that? It gets you to study color more closely and to have more creative ability with it, to not get yourself stuck in it has to be just this color, but it can be variations.
There was a time for that, though. I mean, 30 years ago, there was that sort of like, no, it has to be this. And so it's so nice to feel the air around that.
Yes.
And the work that you've done with Pantone in terms of like, recent books and having tonalities inside of the palettes that you give. Let me ask you something. I know I said it was done, but clearly I'm not. Skin tones, that's been a sort of a politicized palette, if you will, or let's take the positive view of it and say that it's been a really encompassing, engaging, accepting way of looking at color. Are skin tone palettes that still important? Are we seeing those in product? I mean, we saw some in Paris, very high end, but is that something that is continuing the idea of skin tones amongst one another in a palette?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question of that. And I think, aside from it getting so much attention, because it has been a political issue as well, and that is something we have to view when we're looking at color forecasting. We need to bring that into play. I think there's a better appreciation of skin tones now. When, for example, the color nude, so many people use that color. And I was an early proponent of saying, wait a minute, it's not nude for everybody, that particular
right.
shade. Let's
and
think
there's nothing worse than seeing it on the wrong body. Yeah.
Exactly. And so if you think in terms of the whole black-brown family, which reaches out beyond the usual whiter Caucasian skin, I think there has been a greater appreciation of all of those changes. Again, the tonalities in that color, what truly is a nude, and how do we view now this beautiful tannish mocha brown color that could be a nude too on a particular skin tone. So let's bring that into consideration as we create our color palettes.
I loved some of the things that we were seeing in Paris were, a set of vases, and each one of them was a different value. Or we saw a foosball board where all the players on those rails were different tonalities. And it was like, it sends us a really wonderful message. I mean, yes, it makes a political statement, of course, but it was just, there was something about it that just felt good. It was just, it was very evocative of unity, which I just loved. I thought that was wonderful.
Yes, absolutely.
And Band-Aid now is Band-Aids come out with boxes of Band-Aids that are different tonalities inside of that, following the cosmetics field. So, I mean, that's just great. So I'm going to go back and ask you one question again, because this time, while I completely agree with your statement on black, if you had to say blank is the new black and not have a color, what word would you use as the new black? What is a universal concern right now? What is a unifying, or something that is that everybody feels connected to, if that's the definition of black?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, Tom.
So if I say, if you were to fill in blank is the new black I guess when I think of people saying, blue is the new black, it means that this is something that is on, as misguided as it might be, it's something that is of the moment, a concern that needs to be addressed, that should be adopted, that is something that you have to have. So it may be an emotion, it may be a concern, it may be a vision. Is there anything that you would fill in besides just a color in there?
Well, we do the color of the year at Pantone every year. And all of those considerations enter into our choice of the color of the year.
That's
The
true.
world around us, how are people feeling, the emotions that are involved in it, what the color represents. I mean, all of the things that you addressed is what we do for the color of the year. So if I were to say that there is the color, not that I'm going to say it replaces black, but it's certainly of great importance, is the Viva Magenta, because of all the reasons that you just mentioned, all the implications that got us to arrive at that particular color. Viva Magenta, it's celebratory, it has the excitement of red, it's energizing, adrenaline pumping, all the things that we felt were needed at this particular juncture in time. I can't go into what we're doing for next year.
I was going to ask, come on, just throw me a bone that big.
No, well, we're still doing our research because we do get very involved in studying the reasons for it and coming up with just the right Pantone color. So I can't reveal that to you.
No, like hints as to warm or cool or nothing like that.
I can't even go.
So mean. All right, well, then I'm going to ask a mean question myself. So last year, during the interview, I was just watching the interview that you did with me for Color Cues. You had revealed that you had repainted your bedroom very Perry. And of course, my mind's horrible, so it went to 100 places. But is your bedroom Viva Magenta now? Or
no.
I'm just checking.
No, that's a funny question. No, it is still very Perry. I just am addicted to that color as a bedroom color because it's so inherently exciting, as well as a blue, which has a calming effect. That sounds kind of strange to put the two together, but when you do those undertones and nuances to a color, that's what you create. I just love the color in a bedroom. It just speaks to me. And I've got all of my accessories and everything that work around it. It would be very expensive to change my bedroom.
Well, you do it for your outfit every year, but
well, that's true.
It's funny. You had mentioned metallics, and I'm curious, do you think that like in glass, dichroics or colors that are that change with direction, do those have a place? Colors that that change, because I think that we all objects that are able to change the color of a wall. We're seeing a lot of wall washers, they're called, that have won a lot of design awards recently, that allow you to change a room color to suit your mood or things like that. Does that still have a place? That sort of self-applied chromotherapy, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question it does. And there is more interest in chromotherapy. And I do think that you can't refute the human eye and how it perceives color. And if you add any kind of pearlescence, that kind of finish, or anything that gives that illusion of moving color, people are absolutely and totally mesmerized by it. Even going back to early childhood, the human eye cannot resist it. And a lot of that connection is because it has a feeling of movement of a body of water.
You said undulation recently, and I love that. That's actually.
Exactly. And that represents movement, represents water, flowing water, which is so intrinsic to the human body. I mean, it's something we need, and we're drilled on it, right? Are you drinking enough water? Did you have enough water today?
And we're facing a really dire shortage of it in many places. So
exactly, that's another aspect of it. So my answer is, I don't see it going away. And again, with new technologies, enabling us to look at these new colors. And I will tell you, even if it's something as simple as a rooster or a chicken, I just came back from Maui. And in Maui, they have the chickens wandering around, the wild chickens.
I do.
And I took a picture of one of them because this wonderful teal plumage, the red coxcomb, and the shimmery aspect of the color
Yeah.
of the bird. I mean, people, of course, because it's a rooster wandering around town anyhow, it's going to attract
Right.
attention. But when you look at the colors and you study them, you say it's so inherent in nature.
Yeah.
Even if it weren't a rooster, any other object, people would stop and look. They would pay attention because of that undulation.
You've always been a real proponent of palettes that derive from nature, and and it doesn't mean they have to be dull. There's a lot of friend of mine just came back from the Galapagos, and she said it was like nothing she's ever experienced. And they're all colors that you don't expect to see in nature. But radiant orchid is another great example. These are all colors that have such a tremendous. They're rooted in what we see every day. Well, Lee, I could talk to you all day, but Peter Giannetti would kill me. So.
Not quite, Tom. I like you too much for that.
Thank you so much for spending time with me and
Yeah,
us.
really.
And I'm sure we'll be speaking again, but it is such a pleasure.
Same here, Tom.
Okay, I'll
Have a
talk
good
to you
day.
soon. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for joining us for the debut episode of Design Driven. We hope that we'll see you again soon.